Subscribe to take your place in this universe full of science fiction and horror stories, and go after the unknown, because some truths are hidden in the dark. A dead silence hung over the bridge of the Retribution, thick as the weight pressing on every soldier's chest. It was the silence of finality, of warriors who knew the storm had finally caught them. No alarms blared, no frantic voices filled the comms, no desperate orders rang through the speakers. What was the point? The enemy had them, and every soul on board knew it. Captain Elias Varner stood at the command console, his gloved hands resting lightly on the cold steel frame, eyes locked on the void stretching endlessly beyond the reinforced viewport. The dim glow of the control panels cast sharp shadows across his face, hollowing out his sharp cheekbones, deepening the dark crescents under his eyes. He had not slept in how long? Days? Weeks? It no longer mattered. Sleep was a luxury for those who still had something to wake up for. Beyond the safety of the ship's hull, the vastness of space lay undisturbed but for the distant gleam of warships moving in perfect unison. They advanced with slow, deliberate precision, like executioners savoring the moment before the final stroke. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. It no longer made a difference. Humanity had fallen. Their fleet was dust. Their colonies, ashes drifting in the solar winds. Retribution was the last. A single warship against an empire's fury. Ava Runn, his tactical officer, stood to his right, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her dark eyes fixed on the approaching enemy ships. She was small, lean, built like a blade, compact, sharp, unyielding. She was one of the few left who still carried fire in her blood, though Elias often wondered if it was a hunger for vengeance or simply the inability to accept defeat. "They've stopped accelerating," she said, voice carefully measured. "They know we have nowhere to run." Elias exhaled slowly, controlled. His pulse remained steady, his breathing even. Fear had been burned out of him long ago, seared away in the inferno of lost battles, abandoned colonies, and dying screams over static-filled comms. He turned toward the glowing display that marked their final battlefield. "That makes them predictable," he murmured. Ava shot him a sharp look, an incredulous smile flickering across her lips. "Predictable? We're one ship. They're an armada." Elias's gaze didn't waver. "Then we make sure they remember us." There it was, the shift, the spark in her dark eyes that had nothing to do with the dim light of the bridge. The hunger, the reckless, defiant refusal to go quietly. Elias turned to the navigation station. Lieutenant Darius Holt was hunched over his controls, fingers dancing across the console as he worked furiously, scanning star charts, running calculations. He barely glanced up when he spoke. "If you're thinking of running, sir, there's nowhere left to go. They've boxed us in." Elias studied the layout of the enemy formation. The ships flanked them on all sides, forming an iron net, an unbreakable wall of firepower. But they weren't expecting resistance. Not really. They saw Retribution as a dying thing, a wounded animal waiting for the final shot. That was their mistake. Between their formation and the shattered debris field of a broken moon, there was a sliver of an opening. Narrow, almost impossible to navigate. Almost. He tapped the console, highlighting the gap. "We punch through here, reach Zarkin Prime." Ava stiffened. Holt actually stopped working to stare. "The Imperial shipyard? They don't expect us to head straight into the heart of their empire," Elias said. "That's why we do it." Ava let out a short, sharp laugh, shaking her head. "That's suicide." Elias finally turned to face her fully. His voice was steady, measured, cold. "No, that's war." Holt ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, his eyes darting between the display and the viewport. "Even if we made it, which is a long shot at best, what's the plan? Fly in and wave at them before they vaporize us." Elias looked out at the distant enemy fleet, a storm of fire and steel blotting out the stars. He saw not an end, but an opportunity. "We don't run. We don't hide. We take the fight to them." His voice dropped lower, hard as iron. "We burn their shipyard to the ground." Silence settled over the bridge, thick with the weight of choice. The kind of choice that carved history into before and after. Ava exhaled through her nose, considering. Then, finally, her lips curled into something sharp and feral. Then let's make it hurt. There was no more discussion. No hesitation. They were past the point of second-guessing. Elias gave the order, and the ship groaned as the engines roared to life. The Retribution, battle-worn and bleeding, turned toward the gap in the enemy formation, toward the heart of the Empire, toward vengeance. On the other side of the void, the executioners waited, but they had made one fatal mistake. They thought the war was over. Elias Varner was about to prove them wrong. The Retribution cut through the void like a wounded beast, trailing fire and fractured metal in its wake. Every breath inside the ship felt stolen, each second another defiance against the inevitable. The storm of wreckage behind them raged, an expanding field of shattered rock and twisted debris that had swallowed their pursuers whole. But it would not hold them forever. The enemy fleet was too vast, too disciplined. They would find a way around, recalibrate their pursuit, and come again. Captain Elias Varner stood at the center of the bridge, hands braced against the console as damage reports scrolled in sharp red lines across the screens. The ship had paid for its survival. Hull integrity had dropped to 60%, shields flickering between 25 and 30, engines running hot, too hot. The Retribution had endured countless battles, outlived entire fleets, but even legends had limits. Averin scanned the readouts, jaw tight. We won't survive another chase like that. Elias didn't acknowledge the words. He already knew them to be true. His gaze remained fixed on the viewport, where a distant, sullen glow had begun to take shape against the black, a bleeding ember against the dark. Zarkin Prime, the beating heart of the Empire, the place where their war would end, one way or another. Behind him, Lieutenant Darius Holt let out a sharp breath, raking a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. Tell me we have a plan that isn't just fly in and hope we don't get atomized. Elias turned slowly. The bridge was quiet, the air thick with the unspoken question pressing against them all. They had escaped, but to what end? The weight of it was heavy, pressing against every scar, every loss, every impossible choice that had led them here. We hit the shipyard, Elias said finally. His voice was steady, absolute. We don't hesitate. We don't wait for them to get their defenses online. We strike hard and fast, disable their production capabilities before they can reinforce the fleet. Ava frowned. Zarkin Prime is the most heavily fortified facility in the Empire. Even if we take out their manufacturing centers, the fleet will still be operational. Their fleet is strong, but it's stretched thin. They've committed everything to hunting us. If we take Zarkin, we cut the head off the beast. Elias leaned against the console, scanning the tactical display. Without reinforcements, without new ships, they'll bleed out. Holt let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. You make it sound so simple. One warship against an entire stronghold. What'd go wrong? Elias turned to face him fully. Everything. But if we don't do this, humanity dies in the dark. The silence that followed was thick, charged with something neither fear nor hope, but a grim understanding. They were past the point of return. No more running. No more hiding. Ava exhaled, shaking her head. How do we even get close? The orbital defenses alone will tear us apart before we get in range. Elias tapped the console, zooming in on the schematic of Zarkin Prime. There! A small red marker flared on the map. They're fuel depots. They process raw energy cells for the fleet here. It's the most volatile sector on the station. Holt's eyes widened slightly. You want to detonate their fuel supply? Elias nodded. A single torpedo wouldn't do it, but a sustained barrage, combined with their own energy overflow, could cause a chain reaction. Ava's fingers tightened around the edge of her console. We'd be flying into a firestorm. If we get caught in the explosion, we won't. Elias met her gaze. But they will. Ava hesitated for only a breath, then nodded. She didn't need convincing. Not anymore. Holt, however, still looked unconvinced. And when they realize what we're doing, they'll have to stop us. Elias's expression was unreadable. And that means drawing ships away from their fleet. Holt let out another breath, shaking his head. It's insane. "It's war," Elias corrected. For a long moment, there was no response. Then Ava turned back to her controls, voice steady. "Adjusting course. ETA to Zarkin Prime, 37 minutes. Elias nodded. "Prep weapons. I want full firepower ready the second we're in range." The ship lurched slightly as the engines adjusted, guiding them toward the burning world ahead. Zarkin Prime loomed closer, its surface a latticework of industrial sprawl, glowing with the energy of 1,000 foundries. The fortress of the enemy, the graveyard of entire civilizations. And soon, if Elias had his way, the place where the Empire's reign would end. The bridge lights dimmed slightly as power was diverted. Below decks, the remaining crew braced for battle. They had all come to accept the same truth. There was no survival beyond this. No future beyond fire and wreckage. But if they had to die, they would die tearing a hole through the heart of the Empire. Elias closed his eyes for a brief moment, exhaling slowly. Then he turned back to the viewport, watching as the world of Zarkin Prime filled the screen. "Ready all stations," he said quietly, and the Retribution hurtled toward war. Zarkin Prime burned. The Retribution carved its escape path through the chaos, its hull reflecting the inferno below. The fuel depots, once the lifeline of the Empire's war machine, were now its greatest weakness. Fire leapt from conduit to conduit, a ravenous chain reaction devouring entire industrial sectors. Towers of steel buckled, reactor cores ruptured, and for the first time in living memory, the Empire's might faltered. Inside the bridge, the glow of destruction lit up the viewport like an artificial sunrise. Captain Elias Varner didn't watch it. He was watching the enemy fleet. "They're still repositioning," Ava Wren reported, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "Scrambling to contain the damage. We hit them harder than they expected." Elias nodded. The Empire had always prided itself on its efficiency, on its absolute control. They didn't account for desperation. They didn't believe a single warship could wound them. But there was a truth about empires, about all empires. It wasn't the strongest enemy that destroyed them. It was the enemy they ignored until it was too late. Lieutenant Darius Holt kept his hands steady on the controls, eyes flicking between the navigational display and the dwindling gap in their escape route. "We've got a window, but it's closing fast. If they regroup, we won't make it out." Elias exhaled, slow and measured. "Push the engines to maximum burn. Divert non-critical power to propulsion." Ava hesitated. "That'll leave shields at minimal strength." "They're not shooting at us yet. They're still figuring out what the hell just happened." The ship lurched as Holt executed the command, acceleration pressing them back. The Retribution roared forward, engines burning white-hot, skimming dangerously close to Zarkin Prime's upper atmosphere. The planet's gravity clawed at them, turbulence shaking the hull, but Holt held their course steady. Then the enemy fleet recovered. "Signatures incoming," Ava snapped. "Fast response squadrons. Interceptors. They're not making the same mistake twice." Elias glanced at the tactical screen. The Empire's warships had stopped reacting like an injured beast and started hunting like a wounded predator, ruthless, precise. Interceptors swarmed from the larger capital ships, small but deadly, their engines leaving sharp streaks of blue against the void. Ava didn't wait for orders. "Deploy countermeasures." Flares and electronic jamming pulses burst from the Retribution's hull, momentarily throwing the enemy's targeting systems into disarray. Plasma bolts streaked past them, barely missing their engines. The warship's hull groaned as it banked hard, Holt forcing it into evasive maneuvers that strained what little power remained in their thrusters. Elias gritted his teeth. The ship was old, battle-worn. It wasn't built for speed anymore. "They'll catch us before we reach jump range," Holt said, jaw tight. "We need something to buy more time." Elias's mind worked fast, sifting through their dwindling options. They had already played their biggest move. The fuel depots were gone, the Empire crippled, but the Empire wasn't dead. The retaliation would be swift and merciless unless they made out. He turned to Ava. "Weapons status?" She shook her head. "Primary torpedo bays are drained. Cannons at 30%. not enough to take out a capital ship, let alone the fleet. Elias's gaze flicked back to the tactical display. They didn't need to destroy the fleet. They just needed to stall them. "Holt," he said, "bring us into the debris field." Holt blinked. "What debris field?" "The one we just made." For a second, there was only stunned silence. Then Ava's lips parted in something between a grin and a curse. "You're insane." But she was already recalibrating their trajectory. The ship banked again, skimming along the outer edges of the burning industrial zone. Below them, entire sections of Zarkin Prime had been reduced to molten wreckage, sending shockwaves into orbit. Elias watched the data stream across his screen. The chain reaction hadn't just destroyed the fuel depots, it had ruptured nearby defense stations. Fragments of broken platforms, derelict warships, and burning metal drifted in an unstable cloud around the planet. It was a death trap, and it was their best chance. Holt's knuckles were white against the controls. "If we go in there, I won't be able to course correct if something goes wrong." Elias met his gaze. "Then don't let anything go wrong." The Retribution plunged into the wreckage, dodging jagged remnants of what had once been the Empire's pride. The enemy hesitated. Even interceptors, fast and maneuverable as they were, couldn't navigate the chaos without risk. The larger capital ships pulled back entirely, unwilling to sacrifice themselves for a single warship. Elias felt the shift immediately. The pressure lessened just slightly, a fraction of an opening. Ava was already scanning jump calculations. "We need 5 more seconds to plot coordinates." 5 seconds might as well have been an eternity. The enemy, though stalled, wasn't blind. Some ships braved the wreckage, taking careful shots, grazing Retribution's hull. A direct hit slammed into them. The ship buckled, metal shrieking. Consoles sparked. The lights flickered, alarms screaming through the bridge. Ava cursed. "That took out our lateral thrusters. We're losing stability." Holt fought the controls. "We can't hold this course." "Jump," Elias ordered. Ava's hands flew over the console, inputting the final calculations. The engines whined, struggling against the damage, and for a heartbeat, Elias thought they had waited too long. Then space folded. The Retribution vanished from Zarkin Prime's orbit, leaving only fire and ruin in its wake. For a moment, there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the ship, the vastness of space stretching out around them like a deep exhale after a held breath. Then reality snapped back. Holt swore softly, his hands still clenched on the controls. That should not have worked. Ava let out a breath that was half a laugh. Well, it did. Elias didn't speak. He was already looking at the damage reports flashing across his screen. The Retribution had made it out, but it hadn't come out unscathed. Hull integrity was below 40%. Weapons systems critically drained. Shields flickering. Engines barely holding. They had survived, but survival wasn't victory. Ava must have seen the look in his eyes. "They'll regroup," she said. "The Empire's wounded, but they're not dead. They'll come after us harder now." Elias finally looked up. "Good." Ava frowned. "Good." He turned to the viewport, where the vast emptiness of space stretched before them, a universe full of possibilities. "They're finally afraid." The Retribution drifted in the silence of deep space, wounded but alive. The jump had taken them far beyond the reach of Zarkin Prime, out of the Empire's immediate grasp, but not out of danger. The ship had survived, but survival alone wasn't victory. Captain Elias Varner stood at the center of the bridge, his stance rigid, his mind already moving to the next battle. The aftershocks of their escape lingered in the ship's failing systems. Shields flickering weakly, thrusters misfiring, power conduits overloaded. Smoke still coiled from a few ruined consoles, the scent of burning circuitry woven into the air like the ghost of a fire. Ava Wren sat at her station, scanning the damage reports scrolling across her screen. "We're running on fumes," she muttered. "Weapons are offline. Shields are barely holding at 20%. The hull took a beating, and we've got structural fractures along the starboard side." She exhaled sharply. "We can't fight like this." Lieutenant Darius Holt leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. His usual sarcasm was absent, replaced by something heavier. So where the hell do we go? That was the question. The Retribution had no allies, no safe harbor. The last of the human fleet had been annihilated. They were the final ember of a dying fire, floating alone in an empire that would do anything to extinguish them. Elias studied the star map, glowing across the tactical display. Countless systems, each one under Imperial control. Each one a death trap if they set foot inside. They had wounded the Empire, but that wound would heal if they didn't press the attack. Their escape had been a miracle. Now, they had to turn it into an opportunity. We need a place to regroup, Ava said. A station, a hidden colony, anything where we can repair. Elias's gaze settled on a dimly lit sector on the map, a region marked in old military records as uncharted. Unclaimed, but he knew better. Vesper Reach, he said. Ava frowned. That's an old ghost story. It's not a story, Elias replied. It was an independent colony, decades before the war. The Empire tried to seize it, but the colony disappeared, just vanished. No transmissions, no wreckage, nothing. Official records say it was lost to an environmental catastrophe. I don't buy it. Hull frowned at the map. So what? You think they're still out there? Elias nodded. If they are, they've spent the last 30 years hiding from the Empire. And anyone who survived that long knows how to stay off the grid. Ava leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. Even if they are out there, they won't welcome us. If they've been in hiding this long, why take the risk of helping us? Elias met her gaze. Because we just did the impossible. We made the Empire bleed. He looked back at the map, his expression unreadable. That means we're not the only ones left fighting. Holt exhaled, shaking his head. I can't believe we're flying into a ghost colony based on a legend. Elias gave a small, grim smile. It's not the strangest thing we've done this week. Ava didn't argue. She set the new course, and the ship groaned as it adjusted trajectory. The journey to Vesper Reach took hours. Hours spent in the quiet hum of a ship that felt more fragile than it had before. The crew worked tirelessly, sealing fractures, rerouting power, salvaging what they could from the damage. No one spoke of what came next. No one spoke of what would happen if they found nothing but silence at the end of this road. Elias didn't sleep. He stood in the observation deck, watching the distant stars slip past. He had spent his entire life fighting wars, but this was something different. This was survival in the rawest sense, not just for himself, not just for his crew, but for the last ember of humanity. When the ship finally reached the coordinates, there was nothing but darkness. No beacons, no signals, just the remains of a dying star system, the planets long since reduced to drifting rock. The scanners flickered, running endless loops, searching for something. Anything. Ava's voice broke the silence. There's nothing here. Elias didn't move. He stared at the emptiness ahead, at the dead expanse where a colony should have been. Then, for the first time in hours, a single blip appeared on the scanner. A ship, not Imperial, not human, something else. And it was already moving toward them. The unknown ship closed in, a silent predator in the dark. The bridge of the Retribution was deathly still, every officer watching the sensor display as the solitary blip grew closer. It was unlike anything in the Imperial database. No transponder signal, no familiar hull design, no recognizable flight pattern. It had been waiting. Captain Elias Varner stood at the helm, arms folded as he studied the approaching vessel. A ship here in the dead expanse of Vesper Reach. Either this was a ghost from the past, or something far worse. Size, he asked. Ava Run, her fingers moving deftly over the controls, frowned. Mid-range, larger than us, smaller than a dreadnought. Configuration is strange. Hull plating isn't Imperial, or human. Lieutenant Darius Holt let out a sharp breath. I really don't like when things don't have a category. Any comm signals? Elias asked. Nothing, Ava replied. No hails, no encryption, no standard frequencies. But they know we're here. That much was obvious. The ship wasn't just moving toward them. It was adjusting course with purpose, matching their trajectory precisely. Elias made his decision. Hold position. Let them make the first move. Holt turned in his chair, incredulous. You want to sit here and wait for whatever the hell that thing is to come knocking. We're too damaged to run. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. Ava shot him a sideways glance. That's an optimistic take. The unknown vessel closed the distance, drifting into view outside the Retribution's viewport. It was sleek, angular, almost organic in its construction. The surface gleamed darkly, shifting under the starlight like liquid metal. No visible weapons, no insignia, no indication of origin. Then, without warning, a transmission crackled through their comms. It wasn't a voice. Not exactly. It was a sound, something between a pulse and a whisper, layered in distorted echoes. Words tried to form, but never fully took shape. The crew exchanged wary glances. Ava worked quickly, running it through the translator. The ship vibrated slightly, as if responding to the message. The lights flickered. The whispering sound continued, shifting, aligning, until words emerged from the distortion. You are not Imperial. Elias straightened. No, we're not. A pause. Then, your war has burned the sky. Ava exchanged a look with Holt. Elias remained still. Who are you? Another pause. Then survivors. The bridge remained silent, absorbing the weight of that word. Ava leaned in toward her screen. Captain, I'm picking up faint structures on the planet below, buried under the surface. This system isn't empty. Elias exhaled slowly. Vesper Reach hadn't vanished. It had simply gone to ground, and whoever had been left behind had learned to survive in ways no one had imagined. He turned back to the transmission. We need a place to repair. We need refuge. The whispering voice wavered, as if considering. Then, you carry war with you. War follows. Elias knew the truth in that. The Empire wouldn't stop hunting them. Any refuge they found would become a battleground. And yet, this ship had approached them. These people, if they were even still human, had chosen to make contact. You found us, Elias said. That means you have a reason. Silence. Then follow. The unknown ship turned, gliding toward the planet's surface. Ava's brow furrowed. This could be a trap. Holt shook his head. It could also be the first good luck we've had in a long time. Elias studied the alien ship, the way it moved, effortless, precise. If they wanted them dead, they wouldn't have spoken at all. Take us in, he said. The Retribution followed, descending into the lost world of Vesper Reach. The Retribution followed the unknown ship into the atmosphere of Vesper Reach, its hull trembling as it cut through the dense layers of clouds. Outside, lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating the endless wasteland below. Vast, barren plains stretched toward the horizon, broken by jagged cliffs and crumbling structures, ruins of a civilization long thought lost. Captain Elias Varner stood at the bridge, watching the surface draw closer. The storm outside cast deep shadows over the land, shifting and writhing like ghosts unwilling to be forgotten. He had spent his life fighting battles across the galaxy, but this place felt different. It wasn't a battlefield. It was something older. Ava Wren's voice cut through the tense silence. Scans show subterranean infrastructure, still intact. Something's alive down there. Holt frowned at his console. I'm not reading any power signatures, though. If this is a settlement, it's running dark. Elias kept his eyes on the alien ship, guiding them. It moved like no vessel he had ever seen. Fluid, almost sentient, its dark surface shimmering under the stormlight. It wasn't Imperial. It wasn't human. And yet, it had spoken to them. A voice returned through the comms, the same layered, whispering tone as before. You will land here. The ship banked, descending toward a deep canyon that had been hidden from orbital scans. The walls of the ravine stretched high, swallowing the storm, leaving only stillness below. Elias hesitated for only a breath. Then, take us in. The Retribution's thrusters flared as it adjusted course, gliding into the narrow passage. The canyon floor was smooth, unnatural, as if carved by something far more precise than time. As the ship touched down, the landing gear groaned against the stone, the weight of their journey pressing down into the surface of a place that shouldn't exist. Silence followed. Ava exhaled, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. So now what? Elias didn't answer. The alien ship had landed beside them, and as its sleek hull shifted, an opening appeared, an entrance forming from seamless metal. Then they stepped out. Figures emerged from the vessel, moving with deliberate grace. Their forms were humanoid but elongated, their armor-like exosuits forged from the same, shifting material as their ship. Their faces were obscured by dark visors, but Elias felt their eyes on him, studying, measuring. One figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, an air of command in its posture. The voice came again, this time not through the comms, but directly into the air. "You are not what we expected." Elias held his ground. "Neither are you." A pause. Then, "You seek refuge. But refuge is not without cost." Ava took a half-step closer, wary. "We're not here to start another war." The figure tilted its head slightly, as if amused. "War is already here. You carry it with you." Elias didn't argue. The Empire would come. Whether in days or weeks, they would track Retribution's jump signature, follow the trail of destruction left in their wake. There was no avoiding it. "We need repairs," he said. "A place to recover." The figure studied him for a long moment before responding. "And when they come?" Elias met its gaze, unflinching. "Then we make them regret it." Something shifted in the air between them, an understanding, unspoken but undeniable. The figure inclined its head. "Then come. You will see what remains of Vesper Reach." It turned and began walking toward a section of canyon wall. As it approached, the rock shimmered and dissolved, revealing a hidden passage descending into darkness. Ava glanced at Elias. "We're really doing this?" Elias nodded. "We don't have another choice." They followed their new hosts into the depths of a forgotten world, leaving the storm behind.